Hey DIYers, what's up? Mike Borders with the Mike Borders channel. Thank you for watching. We're talking Mercruiser outdrive or stern engines. We are going to show you the full rebuild of the upper unit. Now this is everything into one video. We do have shorter segments. Part 1 is scrolling above if you're into that. However, again, if you want everything, you're in the right spot. Let's get started. Alright DIYers, at the workstation now, on the left hand side you see on a stand is the upper unit, and to the right side on that white stand down there is the lower unit. We separated those in the previous video, and if you need guidance on separating the upper unit from the lower unit, definitely check out the link scrolling above. It will be very helpful. However, let's get right into it and a quick little look at it. U-joints are in pretty rough shape. We are going to grab our 3/8 socket and ratchet and remove all 4 of those bolts. Socket and ratchet in hand, again a 3/8 size, and I'm using this socket as shown here. And in the previous video, prior to separating the upper from the lower, I actually loosened up these 4 bolts. So it will look like they are easy to come off, but they were pretty firmly secured. And again, I loosened them prior to separating the upper from the lower because when it's still connected, it doesn't slide off the stand and you got better leverage to loosen up these bolts. And from here again, all I'll do is remove all 4 bolts. All 4 bolts are removed and I've set them up on the table. From here, grab a thick flathead screwdriver and you are going to go to the side near the front, and your engine will have a little gap right here to stick a screwdriver in and separate the upper cap from the unit. And there is an open slot on each side. And set the screwdriver down. From here, you should just be able to carefully separate it by hand. We'll set that aside. What I did next was inserted the bolts in the same holes that they came out of. As I put everything back together, I want the same bolts going into the same holes. And quick glance at the inner gears. From here, we will direct our attention to the front portion. This is a retainer nut, and it secures the inner bearings and U-joint assembly in place on the engine. And some people can get away with just loosening up this retainer nut and shifting it out, and that will give you the opportunity to shift this entire U-joint assembly out of the engine. However, some may not have the clearance because of the U-joints and crossbars, and they will need to remove the clips that hold the crossbars on, hammer out the U-joint caps here that have the inner bearings, and shift this portion out. But we're going to go grab the tool and see if we can get away with not having to do that. All I did next was applied a piece of cardboard on the top just to protect the upper surface of this nice wood on this Craftsman bench. I don't mind if it gets dirty, but I don't want to destroy it throughout this project. Here is the wrench that removes the retainer nut. And some people, and check that out, that is a perfect fit. And if you do not have this tool and you are trying to loosen up this retainer nut by some other means, chances are you are going to destroy the retainer nut itself, and that will need to be replaced. Buying the right tool will make it convenient and will ensure you do not destroy that retainer nut. Next, I just grabbed a rubber mallet, and holding the retainer wrench in place, I'm going to just tap the top and hopefully loosen up this retainer nut. And that was very easy. Look at that. And from here, I'll just carefully continue to loosen it. And again, hopefully I have clearance. I don't know 100% yet, but hopefully I do. And it really looks like I do. So that saves me a lot of time by not having to remove these inner C-clips that lock the crossbars in place on the U-joint assembly. Use the wrench to turn it several times, and from here I can just spin it by hand. And check that out. The retainer nut is completely loosened up and separated from the inner portion of the engine. I've now repositioned the stand, and I've got a piece of cardboard down because as you pull this entire U-joint assembly out with the bearing connected to it, it's going to leak some oil. From here, go ahead and lift up the U-joint and kind of slide that as shown here to protect the back side or opening / surface of where the bearing slides into. And next I'm going to grab a pry bar and go deep inside the U-joint where I can use this portion of the wrench as leverage. And the last thing I want to do is allow this pry bar to touch that retainer nut. I want to protect this retainer nut and just kind of give it some friendly jolts. Check that out. And a quick recap, as I did this, I inserted this portion of the wrench right here to protect the surface here of the engine. And the inner bearing is ever so slightly positioned behind the face of the opening. So just a couple friendly jolts and you loosen up the bearing and it slides forward flush with the opening. Go ahead and remove these and pull it out by hand. Here it is up on the workbench, and again, just very important not to damage this retainer nut. We do want to keep that and reuse it when we rebuild everything. And back to the engine, what we're going to do is clean up all the oil in the inner portion here. And once we do that, deep in here you've got a couple additional parts, and as you can see here, there's two parts. One is a shim, one is a spacer. The shim is closest to us, and that is thinner, so you want to make sure you do not mix these up when reinstalling the new ones. What I did next was rest the shim and spacer over the gear, so I know exactly which way it goes back on when reassembling everything. Back to the engine, spent about a minute and cleaned up all the oil out of this opening here, and you can see a little bit of indication of rubbing there. We'll clean that up prior to reassembling everything. From here, carefully grab the vertical gear and it should just pop right out. And it might drip oil. Be careful as you shift it to your workbench or wherever you are placing it. And there it is, DIYers, the vertical gear and bearings. Pretty neat. Back to the engine. And down inside there, you can see we have a destroyed seal, and that definitely needs to be replaced. I believe that is the lower seal. We've got an upper seal and lower seal. Let's go ahead and remove the lower one first. What I'll do next is grab a 1/2 inch extension and the same rubber mallet I've been using. Carefully insert it through the upper seal and down to the lower seal and carefully tap it out. Lower seal is removed and pretty bad shape. From here, what we need to do is carefully either go down below and hammer up to hammer out that upper seal, or reposition the upper unit onto the workbench and turn it upside down. At this point, I've got the upper unit on the bench upside down, and we now have access to insert the extension and pop that upper seal out, and it is inside here, and it will pop out basically down below. That came out surprisingly easy, and there it is. Upper unit is now resting safely back on the stand, and DIYers, that completes part number 1. Next, coming inside, DIYers, this could very quickly become the nightmare of your project. Take a look at that part that is secured by those 4 bolts, and you can definitely see that there is some serious melting to that part. That is your water pocket unit, and it's got a copper pipe that extends upward in our case. However, when the boat engine is upright and secured to the boat, that pipe is facing down. And what a lot of people run into is snapping those bolts when removing them, and trust me, that becomes a nightmare. So with that said, in the event that your water pocket unit looks good, there's no melting, most people just keep the one that's installed and move forward without replacing it. However, as you can see with our melted and badly damaged part, unfortunately we cannot move forward without replacing it. So what we recommend is spraying those bolts with PB Blaster, letting it sit overnight, and then carefully begin removing those. However, in our case, we have actually inserted an extension and socket on each of those bolts, and believe it or not, ours loosened in a pretty friendly manner. And take into consideration, in the event that your bolts do not move, we highly recommend not forcing them. In other words, do your best to restrain yourself from grabbing a long breaker bar and breaking those bolts as you try to loosen them up. Once you break them free, baby steps. Be very patient, go very slow. Again, too many boat owners are running into snapping these bolts inside the upper unit, and that becomes an unbelievably horrific nightmare. Making progress on the left-hand side, both forward and rear bolts have been loosened. They are no longer flush with the housing. That is so melted, not good. On the right-hand side, in the rear, that bolt has been loosened. Unfortunately, the front right bolt is kind of being eaten by that melted housing. So what I need to do is grab a pick tool and carefully pick away at that melted housing that is melted onto that bolt, because unfortunately I cannot get the socket on the bolt. That's the tool I'm using. Nothing fancy. It's doing the job though. After about 5 minutes of using that pick tool, I have inserted the socket and extension on the bolt, and it's not seated all the way, but I've come up top and I'm going to carefully with a rubber mallet tap that in place. until I got a firm grip on that bolt. Quick update, I removed the socket extension and ratchet, and I grabbed this really long flathead screwdriver. I still was unable to get a good grip on that bolt, and the last thing you want to do is strip it. And if you take a closer look, you may not be able to see it, but even though I have created a groove around the bolt head, I can't actually turn it because each edge or tip of the bolt rubs against that plastic. So I grabbed this long flathead screwdriver and I placed it in the groove I made with that pick tool, and I just carefully just kind of worked that groove away from the bolt head so it's a little bit larger. And I got a good grip of it now. Again, baby steps. Do not rush it. Do not snap that bolt inside that thread. All 4 bolts are loosened and should be able to just pull up this entire part up and out. And again, DIYers, badly melted. If yours looks like this, replace it, or it will continue to leak water and cause damage to your engine. And back to the inside, coming up from the top, and I'll carefully pull that gasket off, and it will be stuck. Just be patient. There it is. And that's what it looks like inside. We'll go ahead and clean that up before we install the new gasket and new part. So again, DIYers, that is how you remove your water pocket part. And I would say there's not much to it, but there is. Do your absolute best not to break those bolts inside the cast iron upper unit. That would not be good. However, again, if yours looks like that, replace it. Back to the upper unit, and basically every part is removed except for our gear shifter. As you can see here, that's still in really good condition. I'm just gonna leave that in there. And it is secured by a little counter pin and a washer, as shown here. Here's a quick tip for you DIYers. In the event that you are doing this project inside like I am, these gears, bearings, and shafts give off a very potent and strong oil smell because they are lubricated and oiled. And in the event that you do not take them outside and put them in the garage or somewhere else, they will definitely make your house smell like strong oil. And to alleviate that, what I've done is just inserted the parts in Ziploc bags and closed them up for the most part. That's a little too big. As well as the cap. What I've done next was I grabbed some Craftsman 800 grit, basically Scotch-Brite, and I had this laying around, and I recommend 800 to 1000. Just cut a little piece off. I am going to insert it, and I want to clean the inner portion of both the lower seal area as well as the upper seal area. And it is a tight fit, but again, I want to clean the entire inner portion where that lower seal will be seated. And I'm going to rotate in the circular manner as opposed to up and down. And I will clean this entire inner portion, and then I'll vacuum it out to ensure any and all particles are out of that insert. After vacuuming, you want to again just wipe out the entire inner portion of the seal. Best to do it with some lacquer thinner. Just a quick little dab on a paper towel as shown here. Clean both the lower insert as well as the upper insert, and I'll let that dust settle, and I will vacuum once again. After you ensure and are very confident that the inner portions of these seal housings are clean and clear, now it's time to install the seals. And for ours, we've got the GLM 87500 gear case seal kit, and that comes with several parts, as you can see here. And we're going to pull out the seals. In addition, you will need some gasket sealant compound, and Evinrude & Johnson is the recommended, and that's what we purchased, but we got this in the mail. It's the same exact stuff, just a different manufacturer, Loctite. And you may or may not need this. It was only $15 for us. It is a punch to properly seat the upper and lower seals. Again, only $15, so we thought, why not? Let's just buy it and do it right. From my local Ace Hardware, I picked up this $3 bolt, and I matched the thread. I took this actual punch to Ace Hardware, matched the thread, and that will give me a little extra height to assist in punching these seals in place. We have now pulled out the upper and lower seals, and there is a difference. One side is an inner loop with a spring, and the other side is flat, as you can see here. Funny thing about this part that we purchased from SEI, there's the part number 89-101-19. We will post a link down below in the comment section as well as the description section on where to buy this. When this came in the mail, sealed in this actual package, believe it or not, a lower seal was already installed on it. Don't know if this is new, used, or why it's even there. But we're going to take it off and it should just pop right off. And don't get them mixed up. I'm tossing this right away. I've repositioned the camera. It is time to install the seals. And because my upper unit is resting on my workbench and positioned in a way, I'm first going to install the lower seal. And again, after you install this lower seal, the inner lip or spring side should be facing you. And that is this open end here. And if it's a tight fit, do your best not to damage the rubber seal. What I've got is just a shot glass of water. And I'm going to put a little bit of water on the inner portion of the seal as well as the part. And again, when installing this seal on the punch, you want to install it with the spring side down. And do your best to rotate it to properly seat it, as shown here. I'm now going to screw in that large $3 bolt I purchased, and we are now going to add the sealant compound. And it has to be this brown stuff. I'm using a Q-tip because I don't need to actually pull this entire thing out. I'm just going to run this around the entire portion of the outer seal. And I'm going to coat it on there pretty good. And here it is, all gasket sealed and compounded up. Here's a top view of it. Again, you will notice that the lip side is now down, and we've got basically the flat side facing us. And we are going to insert it up here and all the way down. And we are going to align it properly, and hopefully I can get away with using the rubber mallet and carefully tapping it in place. After you seat that seal, you can carefully pull up on the punch and pull it all the way out. Go ahead and wipe that off. And there is the finished product. And I'll come up top just to show you again that the inner lip that has the spring has to be facing us. And I'm going to scroll in, and there it is. You can barely make out the lip and spring, but again, it is facing us. And when we have this boat upright and on the stand, that seal will be facing down toward the lower unit. What we'll do is flip this upside down, rest it on the stand, and prep the larger upper seal. Upper unit is now on the stand. I went ahead and wiped out the entire inner portion where that seal is going to mate or seat, and vacuumed it as well. I try to get away with using the rubber mallet in most cases. However, in this case, rubber mallet was not doing any good whatsoever. I needed an extra bit of weight, the 2-pound Tecton, and that worked out great. From here, I'll remove the screw it into the opposite side. However, before I do that, I will actually insert the seal on there. To prep the upper seal, I will remove that bolt. And again, the spring or lip and open side of the seal will be facing us, and the punch will go in this way. That means we have to install the seal spring side in. And I may need a little bit of water just to allow that seal to slide on there. Rotate it slightly, just like that. And I will now resecure that bolt. Flip it upside down here, and I'm going to add that sealant compound all around the seal. And I'm really going to coat it on there. Here it is. Lots of sealant added. And again, it's going to be installed straight down, and we are going to punch it in place right down here. Upper seal is secure. DIYers, it is extremely important to drive this in or punch this in straight down. In the event that you go in crooked, it will damage the outer portion of the seal. You do not want that. And on top of that, in the event that you get any of that sealant compound on the inner race here that the vertical bearing seats into, get that off of there. You do not want any of that gasket sealant compound on that inner race and affecting or interfering with the operation of your bearings. Not good. To the water pocket cover. And the cover assembly, part number, it's a OEM Quicksilver 42724 Alpha 3. And that's going to go inside here. Here it all is. Let's go and open it. Here it is out of the packaging, and there's the housing. It's got a little hole here, the bar, the gasket, the bolts, and this little rubber insert, as you can see here, will go inside the housing. And take note of how I do this. The actual nipple or rubber portion that is sticking out, that will go in first, and you've got more space on top of the actual tab or nipple, and that is the top. So pinch this and slide it in, and I may need both hands, maybe not. And as you can see, again, it is a rubber insert, so carefully squeeze it or compress it and continue to shift it in place until it's properly seated and that nipple comes out that hole. Here it is. Again, compressing that rubber insert, just slide it right down and in place. And once you get that nipple in, kind of work it back up and to the sides and back down to properly seat that nipple in that hole. And let's go and open the gasket. With the gasket out, you can see on the other side just some print, and basically it's one long piece, and then they use the machines to cut it. And we are going to have this side up, mating with the bottom portion of the housing there. We are going to have that side down, mating with the portion in there. And no need to use any gasket sealant on this. You'll just carefully insert that and align it properly over the holes. And we strongly recommend vacuuming and cleaning that entire surface that is going to mate. Make sure there are no corrosion or any calcium buildup that will interfere with that seal, and that seal could fail, and you don't want that. What I'll do next is insert this. I'm actually going to Loctite that in place, and let's go grab the old part. Well, DIYers, here we are, old part on the left, new part on the right-hand side, and can you tell the difference? Absolutely, a huge difference. Can't even make out that hole on the melted old part at all. Isn't that crazy? Again, if yours looks like this, replace it. Don't move forward in the project having that water pocket cover in that condition. Here's a quick view of the opposite side. Old on the left, new on the right. Big difference. From here, I'm going to remove this bar, and I'm going to properly make sure that this bottom portion of the housing is clean and wiped off. Prior to securing these bolts, I'm going to put anti-seize on the actual thread to make it easier to remove this housing down the road and replace it with a new one. I will open up the anti-seize and apply some anti-seize to each bolt thread. And all I'm going to do, you definitely want a towel accessible. Just work that anti-seize into the thread, as shown here. And as you can see, it gets pretty dirty. So again, have a towel available. And I will continue this process for the remaining 3 bolts. No easy way to do this, unfortunately. I've got all the bolts in the housing. Make sure that the circular indent is facing forward, basically toward where the U-joint bearing assembly goes into. Shift that down in place. And I am then going to secure all of those 4 7/16 bolts with this right here. And just like taking them off, baby steps putting them back in. Do not cross thread these. They should go in extremely easy. If they do not, back them out, realign them, and screw them back in. And because we are seating a gasket, you want to go in a specific sequence. Once I get all these bolts screwed in, I will tighten them by starting right here, hop to this side, 3 turns on that side, hop to this side, 3 turns, 3 turns, 3 turns, 3 turns until it is secured. Do not over tighten any of the bolts. Long extension and ratchet. And again, 3 turns, hop to the back one. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Again, we are properly seating the gasket. Water pocket cover is secured. Again, do not over tighten those bolts. Do it in sequence to properly seat that inner gasket, ultimately creating that watertight seal. What we will do next is install this rod here, but we are going to apply just a little bit of Loctite on this portion and then slide it into the rubber fitting. We will be using Loctite 680 retaining compound by Henkel, and the manufacturer strongly recommends to not use this on plastic. However, in our application, it will be going on copper and sliding into that rubber insert we installed on the plastic housing. I'll only go about a ½ an inch up and basically apply it and use my finger to spread it around the bar. And do your best not to get any inside the bar. And as you saw, I did not apply much. And I'm going to shift this into the hole, and you want it as straight as possible. I'll tap it down with a hammer ever so gently. Here's the finished product. And again, the copper pipe is as straight up and centered in that housing or rubber insert as possible. And that Loctite is going to keep this copper bar in place the remainder life of that part, both the rubber insert and the pipe. And that will actually connect to this upper portion here that comes out of your water pump or impeller. And real quick, as you hammer that in place, be very careful and gentle. You do not want to offset that rubber nipple that shifts into that little hole in the housing. And DIYers, that completes part 2 of our rebuild. Hopefully you're still with us, having fun, and we are somewhat of help to you. Alright DIYers, it is now time to remove this from the plastic Ziploc bag and disassemble it, because again, we need to obtain or capture that retainer nut. Here it is out of the Ziploc bag, and as we talked about in previous videos, bad shape. Bellows gave way, allowed water and moisture in, and it began to rust. And back here, you'll notice I've got a 15/16 socket, and that is for the preload nut. We need to remove this and begin pulling the parts off the actual shaft to get the retainer nut. And you may be able to hold the assembly with one hand and remove the preload nut with the other. However, if you can't, you might need to vise it up or use an impact drill with the socket. At this point, I've got the entire assembly in the vise, and I use paper towel, believe it or not, just to add a little additional grip. Metal on metal tends to slide. And again, this preload nut and washer have to come off, and we have to lock this assembly because as you turn this gear, the entire U-joint assembly turns with it. 15/16 nut, and I just used a breaker bar here and carefully, with the added leverage, loosened up the nut. From here, I will switch back to the smaller ratchet, and as I do this, I gotta be careful because all these parts will fall off after removing this nut and washer. So I may actually take it out of the vise and reposition it on the table. I will loosen it, however, with the smaller ratchet. But again, I don't want to remove the nut completely with it in the vise unless I'm holding it with the other hand. And from here I can reposition it on the table and do the rest. Next, I've got this little pick tool here, and I'm going to just carefully shift the washer off without scratching or damaging anything, but in my case it doesn't matter because I'm replacing everything with new stuff. And you will notice one side says nut and the other side does not say anything. When you reinsert your brand new washer, because these old washers cannot be used again. These are already compressed with the preload and used, and in the event that you try to use this old washer to set a new preload, you are setting yourself up for disaster. Replace the washer. Most people replace the nut, but in the manual, we don't see anywhere it says that you have to replace the nut, but we are going to replace the nut. It was only about $3, maybe $4. From here, just carefully pull the assembly apart. And it comes out in a bunch of different pieces. So I highly recommend taking a few photos before you pull this entire assembly apart, because in the event that you are just replacing the oil seal and rubber O-ring and nothing else, you want to stay organized through the project. So I've got my spacer and shim set over there. I'm going to pull the bearing and gear portion off, and this has the inner and outer race as well as the inner spacer. I'm going to set that upside down, and it will leak some oil. That's normal. Next is the oil seal and rubber O-ring, and this little sleeve here houses the internal oil seal. Yeah, kind of beat up. So again, we are replacing that. Prop that up against the gear, pull off the additional race, set that and reconnect it to the oil seal race, and I'll pull the retainer nut off. Very dirty. We are going to clean it up, and we are going to reuse just this retainer nut. And while I'm still dirty, got some paper towel, and again, all I'm going to do now is clean up as much of this old grease and anti-seize on the retainer nut as I can and get it properly clean and prepped to reassemble the new gear, bearing, and U-joint parts all together. I still have a lot of grease inside the thread, and that grease looks like it's mixed with tiny particles, and I'm going to use a wire brush to clean it out. I will start with the brass brush as shown here, and again just work it into the thread and clean out the thread. We are going to apply new anti-seize to this retainer nut when we put everything back together and screw everything tight. I'll wipe it down, and then I will switch to the nylon brush. Very important step. Retainer nut is cleaned up pretty well, and I've got dirty brushes, both the brass and nylon. I will clean those. And something I want to show you, again, be very careful so I know exactly how this goes back together. You will notice I can remove the bearings from the actual gear here. See that? And vice versa. I can press them on by hand. However, with the new gear, I'll show you that here shortly. I'm going to clean my gloves up. I actually had to get it factory pressed by my local marina. And here is the brand new gear bearing assembly. And again, with the brand new gear and brand new bearings, this actually had to be pressed to factory specifications, and my local marina was so kind and they charged me $30 to do that, as well as the vertical gear you'll see when we put everything back together. So DIYers, that is it. That is how you carefully and properly disassemble a U-joint drive shaft assembly with the gear and bearings. Stay organized, do your best not to mix any of the parts up, and in your case, you may just be replacing that oil seal. If that's the case, you just punch it out, and there it is right inside there. And put everything back together, set the preload. However, in our case, again, we've got a brand new U-joint and shaft assembly and all new parts. We are now going to build it. And I've got my schematic and drawing as shown here. And you want to make sure you put everything back the exact correct way. Back to it. As you can see, we've got the original U-joint and shaft assembly, the yoke. Pretty rusted and in tough shape. And we are replacing everything with new except for that retainer nut. We have a brand new U-joint assembly and shaft and all the additional parts that make up your entire assembly that goes in the upper unit and then feeds through the U-joint bellows and all the way through the boat and inside your engine coupler. However, let's talk about a few parts, basically starting from the yoke here and back. And this part right here will be this part number. In our case, they sent us 2. I guess it comes in a 2-pack. That will be fed on first. And here is the oil seal. Now you have 2 options with this. In the event that you want to keep your original and just punch out the old oil seal and insert the new one, you've got that option. Just order the seal. However, you can actually have the seal already in the sleeve by purchasing this part right here. And there's some part numbers for you, and it's shown here. And again, the carrier. Now these are brand new bearings and a brand new gear, so our preload is going to be different per the manufacturer's specifications and manual. In the event that we were setting a preload on used bearings and gear and just replacing that seal, it would be about 4 to 5 with our specific serial number, Alpha 1s, Generation 1, Gen 2s, and most of the Bravos. And to get your exact preload setting, we recommend either calling Mercruiser direct and asking them, give them your serial number, and they will be able to pull up your exact preload for your exact stern drive. However, with our case, we need to take it up to between 6 and 10 inch-pounds when we are using that inch-pound torque wrench. We'll show you that here shortly. And we've got a one-time use washer Here's the old washer. In the previous video, we talked about how you are not supposed to ever use the old washer because it has already been compressed with the previous preload. And in the event that you use the old washer, you will get a false or off preload setting, and that will cause nothing but premature wear and tear on your bearing and gear and have it fail much easier and quicker than it's supposed to. Some people replace the nut. We are going to replace the nut. I believe in the manual it doesn't say anything about using the old nut, but we are rebuilding it. And to the left, we've got the shim and spacer, which will go right here and back inside the upper unit. I'm going to reposition the retainer nut on the spanner wrench. As you see, I've got it locked in my vise. And from here, I'll reposition the camera and continue putting everything together and set the preload. What we'll do next is we need to lubricate the gears before we press it and set that preload. And I'll set this on its side. And the gear lube used is what you put in the lower unit to lubricate your entire outdrive. With our specific Alpha 1 Gen 1, it is the Mercury Gear Lube SAE 90. And this looks familiar, doesn't it? This, again, is what you put in the lower gear lube insert port, and you pump this in, and it makes its way all the way up to the upper unit to properly lubricate the bearings and gear and shaft. So some people do it this way, some people don't. All I'm going to do is remove the cap, and again, I'm going to lubricate. But before that, I want to talk more about this actual oil seal and carrier. Again, we purchased the one that is already compressed and put in the carrier. And it's very important when you do this, use the proper gasket compound. And in our case, it is this stuff right here. And it's the brown stuff as shown right there. Very important not to use anything else when replacing your oil seals throughout your entire upper unit. Real quick, what I've done was just grab some cardboard to prop that part of the U-joint shaft and yoke up to allow me to oil these parts and slide them onto the shaft. We recommend having some paper towel ready because, again, you're going to get oiled up here. And we'll start with this part. You'll notice an indent or beveled machine cutout, and on the opposite side it's completely flat and flush without any indents whatsoever. That is the part that is going to go on, and the beveled or indented part will face rearward toward all the bearings and gears. So I'm going to open up the cap on the oil, and just by pumping just a little bit, very slowly, as you can see, some came out on my finger, and all I'm going to do is lubricate the entire portion, both inner, outer surface, and the opposite side. Get it all oiled up. Again, the flat side on. Next will be the carrier and oil seal. Again, just by pumping just a little bit of oil. And I'm going to lubricate the entire inner seal. Now this race on the actual shaft is what this oil seal is going to secure onto and create that watertight or oil-tight seal. And by lubricating it, it will also help it slide right on, as shown here. Next, what I want to do is oil the actual bearings, and I'm just going to apply some pressure on the pump, which is on the quart, and I'm going to lubricate all through the entire bearing assembly. And yeah, you're going to get dirty. I'll cap this off for now, and I'll pick it up and I'll move it, and I'll flip it upside down. I'm going to lubricate the opposite side bearings as well. Important step, DIYers. And I like doing it this way because you have control of the pump up at the top of the quart. And this is the exact gear lube that comes up the system to help lubricate your gears and bearings. Really work that gear lubricant inside the bearings and make sure that they are all rotating smoothly and efficiently and basically as designed. I'll turn that like that. And one thing I forgot to do, I'm going to take the oil seal part off, and the O-ring needs to be lubricated as well. And I still have some on my glove. I'm just going to lubricate this O-ring and slide it on that little beveled indent on the oil seal carrier, just like that. Nothing to it. Back on the shaft, and from here what we're going to do is reposition the camera and show you installing this into the retainer nut and setting the preload. Here's the gear case seal kit that basically all the seals came in, both the upper and lower schematic here. and that's where I pulled that O-ring from. First thing we will do, I cleaned up again the retainer nut, and I've got this spanner wrench in the vise. I will carefully insert that. Next, I'm going to grab the oiled up parts, and I'm going to apply them exactly how they are in the schematic. Here is the carrier for the oil seal, as well as the lubricated O-ring. And from here, we've got the nut, washer, gear, and bearing, as well as our brand new U-joint assembly and shaft. And I'm going to scoot the bearing over, slide the shaft up, and this part right here slides right onto the oil seal. And make sure that's flush. Grab the gear, rotate it until you match up the splines, just like that. Grab the washer, and make sure you have the side of the washer that says nut facing up, in our case, toward the ceiling. And then we'll grab our nut and hand tighten it. And now that that is hand tightened, it's not going to fall out of the vise or spanner wrench. We will now grab the 15/16 socket and carefully tighten it. And it's easy to push up to give you better leverage. And as you can see, not sure if you can see it, but we've still got a long way before the nut touches the washer. So baby steps, just go slow. If you over tighten this, lights out, game over. You will have to start over, and that is not what we want to do. Now to a close up at where we are now. If I push up on the lower yoke and shaft, you'll notice there is no more space in between the nut and washer. Now it's time to grab our inch-pound torque wrench and check this thing out. This is a 0 to 30, which is extremely precise for our project, and that's why we purchased this. And down below in the comment section as well as description section is a link to a video where we give a full explanation and review or demonstration on using this tool. And I'm going to zero this out, the orange needle on 0, as you see there. And in our case, you'll notice 0 to 5 and a lot of white markings in between. Because we bought the 0 to 30, and again, this is extremely precise, the white markings indicate a ½ count. So 0, 1/2, 1, 1 1/2, 2, 2 1/2 is that first bold white line that's longer than the others, and all the way up to 5. And I want to take it to 8 because we have brand new gears, and this is extremely important. In the event that you are using your old gears, you will preload 4 to 5 pounds or inch-pounds. However, because we are using brand new gears and bearings, as shown here, the Mercruiser manual calls for 6 to 8 inch-pounds to be set on the preload for the brand new set. So this little blue needle is a memory needle and peak torque, and I'm going to spin this to 8. That white marking that's bold in between 5 and 10, that's the 7.5, so just shifting it up one more is 8. Using the long screwdriver, I will insert that through the yoke and spin this until it is locked in place. And in between the carriers, you have this little spacer. And what I want to do is make sure it is perfectly positioned and there is an indent in between each carrier the entire way around. So as I tighten it, it will properly seat. And again, a little at a time to ensure you do not over tighten this. And when measuring the rolling resistance, make sure you take that screwdriver out. And right now, it is at about 1.5. And it's at about 2, and you will have to continue this process several times until you get the perfect reading. And as you tighten this, spin your bearings. and that will help lubricate the additional bearings down below and move that gear oil. And another close-up view, I do want to show you where I am inserting that screwdriver. Down below, you have a grease fitting or point, and you have an additional grease fitting right inside there. The way I insert this is in the middle, so it does not come in contact with either of those fittings. And as you tighten this, again, go very slow, baby steps. You do not want to over tighten it, but once this brand new washer begins to compress, it is tight, and it might actually make you think that you're over tightening it, but again, rely on your inch-pound torque wrench. And a quick recap on the actual bearings. This inner spacer, it's very important that you ensure that spacer stays centered in between the two bearing carriers. And the instructions show a pictorial image of a clamp wrapped around this bearing portion and carriers and screwed tight to alleviate this inner spacer from getting offset. And if you've got a clamp, definitely use it. Unfortunately, in our case, we don't have one handy. So as we move through this project, we will go very slow and be very precise to, again, make sure this inner spacer is perfectly centered in between the carriers. And right now it's at about 4.5. Let me make sure as it comes around I can read it upright. Yep, just a little bit more to go. And again, spin your bearings as you work through this project. And I had to do this a couple more times, again, ensuring that that inner spacer is properly centered. And I know I mentioned I was going to take it up to 8, but it's at 7 right now, and I am perfectly happy with this. And to properly get your reading on your inch-pound torque wrench, grab the bearings or carriers and that spacer and carefully rotate. DIYers, that is it, and that is the finished product. And what I'll do is move it to the bench. I want to talk about that inner spacer or ring. With the assembly on the bench, again, this is a press fit bearing on a larger diameter gear. This is a new design, and the old or OEM original gear is slightly machined in smaller diameter, which allows the bearing set to basically slide right off. And I can take this gear and basically push the bearings off of it, as you can see. Again, this is a slip fit design compared to the new design, which is a press fit. Larger diameter machine cut on the gear does not allow the bearings to just slide right off. Hence, that's where they get their name, the press fit. Now, this little inner ring or spacer comes with your new bearing set, and that's because the company selling the bearing set thinks you are going to install the new bearing on the old gear. And if you did that, you will need this small inner spacer, and I think it's right there. You can basically pop that off. And with the old gear set and bearing, you put everything together on the new assembly or spline shaft and you torque it down to 80 pounds. And I believe that comes to a perfect 4 to 5 inch-pounds on this little gadget here. However, if you are installing your new bearings on a larger and new design gear that has to be pressed, it is highly important, do not use this spacer. And DIYer, scrolling above right now is a video that we dive deep into the comparison between the two, the original gear and bearings, as well as the new design. I highly recommend checking that out. It is very important to know the difference when setting your preload. Here is our upper gear, or vertical gear, and our upper unit. First thing we'll do, I've got Quicksilver Marine Grease 24C. I'm going to use that. This is your little shifter. As you can see, it moves pretty freely at this point. However, I'm going to grease both the inner portion here, where the cotter pin goes into, and down here. Have some paper towel readily accessible, and no need to overkill it. Just apply some grease around the actual shifter bar and the cotter pin, as well as that washer. Again, this will go a long way over the months and years that this shifter is in use when you're out on the water. To the underside, and again, just apply some grease. I'll put a little more on there. I now have the upper unit resting on the stand, and coming down below, I've added additional grease right here. And as you can see, it's in there pretty good. And you can basically rotate it and move it around a little bit, get that grease inside that little hole that the gear itself goes into. And from here, coming up top, we are going to install the vertical gear. To the vertical gear, and I want to talk about this little carrier right here. If you reference your schematic, here is our upper unit. Starting with number 25, we've got our gear, bearing, and carrier. And shifting over to the actual vertical gear itself, here's your gear, here's your bearing, it spins freely, and there's the carrier. So basically this goes inside the engine or upper unit, and that carrier houses the bearing. And I want to show you where that is in the upper unit, coming inside, and here is the original carrier. You'll need a press to get that out. We are actually going to keep that in there, and we've cleaned up any and all scuffs or scoring. And here's that little opening that the lower unit pushes the gear oil up into the upper unit and properly lubricates the upper unit's bearings. So our brand new carrier, we are not going to use. Again, that's right there, and it's inside your upper unit. If yours looks good, you may just want to use your original one. Now the next part, personal preference. Some people flip the vertical gear upside down and apply some Quicksilver 24C in the underside here. As you can see, that is the spline area, and that is where the shaft on your lower unit feeds into. What it does is it comes through the lower oil seal down below that we installed and meets inside here. And with that said, some people apply the grease at this point, as opposed to having grease on the shaft of the lower unit. And when it comes time to shift the lower unit in place and secure it to the upper unit, that alleviates grease from getting anywhere in the event that you are off-centered or that upper portion of the shaft touches any other parts. However, again, personal preference, we are going to apply a little bit of grease inside the lower unit spline area of the vertical gear. And I said little, we're not going to overdo it. And when it comes time to resecure the lower unit and shift that up in place, we may also put a little bit of grease on the new spline of the new shaft. And again, just a little bit, I'm not going to overdo it. And do your best not to make a mess. As you can see, not much on my finger. It's going in, and I'm just going to lubricate the spline area. And I will clean up any excess grease before installing it. What I did next was grab the old vertical gear. I'm going to flip that upside down and compare it to the new gear and bearing. And as you can see, the part that we just oiled, the inner spline, very dirty and rusty. If you are using your original vertical gear, that has got to be cleaned off to a point where it looks like this, or this is going to eat your new seal alive, and that is rusty and very gritty. So with that said, if I use this old gear in this condition, that rusty, gritty finish on this portion of the gear shaft, it is going to tear apart that new oil seal we installed. And that is definitely not what we want. I'm going to set that old vertical gear aside, and we are going to apply some 2,4-C grease to this portion right here. Basically, the part that was very rusted on the old gear. And DIYers, not a lot, just a little bit, a very fine, thin layer of grease around this portion of the shaft. Don't get it in the gears. You will oil that with the gear lube in the next step. And this is going to help alleviate this portion of the shaft eating the new seal alive or prematurely failing it. Again, just a light coat, and I gotta clean that up. Next, DIYers, I'm going to lubricate the gear with the gear lube, and this is the SEA 90. And again, this is the actual gear lube that you put into the lower unit that then ultimately feeds upstream or up the system to the upper unit to properly lubricate these gears, both on the vertical gear here, as well as the gears on your U-joint assembly. And I'm going to just open up the cap and get a little bit on my finger and basically lubricate. And some people use other means of lubrication, but I like to use what is going to be the actual lubrication when the engine is put back together and running. And I might actually just pump it as I move it in to that little slot. And go slow and be precise. Don't overdo it, no need to make a mess, but you will get a little bit dirty. Now that I've greased that, go ahead and spin the bearing. Work that lubrication into the bearings itself. And that is very nice. And real quick, a close-up of the Mercury High Performance Gear Lube SAE 90. I might have said SEA, it's actually SAE. And what we are going to do, again, this is all lubricated and greased. We are going to grab the vertical gear and shift it into the upper unit. And as you can see, it is going to go down and align it properly with that lower seal, and it should go in very conveniently. And you can give it a couple rotations, and everything looks good. There is clearance, as you can see. There is no binding, there's no scraping, there's no scoring, and we are satisfied with that. And that is what it looks like so far. And it is time to reposition or shift the U-joint assembly and bearing and gear set in place and secure it with that retainer nut. We are going to clean off the thread, both the retainer nut, and we did our best earlier in the project to clean this thread. You want that clean. We are going to apply some anti-seize to the thread of the retainer nut. And if it's been a few days or weeks since you actually set your preload and your O-ring is slightly dry, go and grab a little dab or two from your gear lube and re-oil or lubricate this O-ring. But before we insert that, it's very important to insert your spacer and shims. In our case, here's our part number. Let's go ahead and open it. Again, first the shim and spacer, and align them in there properly. Shift them all the way back to the absolute rear mating point of the inner part of this upper unit. Now we can position the U-joint assembly and shaft and insert it. And as you shift this bearing and gear in place, do your absolute best to do it as straight as possible, and it should slide right in. Just like that. What I'll do now, I've got the anti-seize, and I will dab a little bit on my finger, as you can see here, and I will just work the thread of the retainer nut the entire way around to make it easier for the retainer nut to come off next time I service the upper unit. And DIYers, as you can see, I am not going over the top with this anti-seize. I'm just applying a thin layer throughout the entire thread, as you can see here. No need to overdo it and get messy with it. What I will do next is secure the retainer nut, and I may have to carefully maneuver the U-joint accordingly. And as you can see, it caught there. If it's not catching, again, turn it counterclockwise, allow the thread to reset, and then turn it clockwise until you can tighten it. We'll hand tighten it from here. It spins pretty easily, and I'm doing my best to grab the outer teeth as opposed to the thread where the anti-seize is, again, to alleviate a mess. Once it's hand tight, I'll grab the spinner wrench, and I'll come up under the shaft and maneuver it until it's all the way onto the retainer nut. And there it is, and turn it clockwise. And continue tightening this until the spinner nut is properly seated. Here it is, DIYers, and again, I can't stress enough how important it is to carefully and slowly insert the entire gear and bearing assembly straight in the upper housing. In the event that you get bound up, do not force it. Immediately pull it back out, realign it, and shift it back in. If you are having trouble shifting it in and it gets stuck and you're having trouble getting it out, carefully remove it and then use a Scotch-Brite pad to polish out the inner portion of this housing. And when it's all said and done, you should be able to move it, as you can see. I can just move it by hand. Let me do it with my right hand here. See that? And the sound you're hearing, that's basically what you want to hear. Those are the gears inside, properly mated and connected, and that is what you want. Take a minute, double check everything is properly completed with this portion. Now it's time to install the upper cap. I've got a new O-ring and I've got 4 new bolts. I took a quick minute and cleaned up the workbench to give you a better presentation, and here is the top portion with the original bolts and the O-ring. There's the new bolts, there's the new O-ring, and a spacer and carrier. Let's talk about these real quick. These are the new ones. And if you reference your schematic, or ours in this case, here's the cap, there's the bolts, there's the O-ring, there's the spacer, the carrier, and the bearing onto the shaft. Well, the bearing's already pressed onto the shaft by the local marina. I cannot take that off. And the carrier, as well as spacer, that is referenced right here and here in the schematic, it's already pressed in the underside or inner side of the cap, and I cannot take that out without the proper tools. If your carrier is still in really good condition, go ahead and use it. No need to go through the hassle of removing this and inserting the new spacer and carrier. If you see any scoring, scratches, or gouges and polishing it out does not help, well, maybe it's time to replace the carrier as well as the inner spacer. However, we are going to remove this O-ring. I might need a little pick tool. Nothing fancy, just a pick tool from my local AutoZone. Do your best not to score any portion. Just grab that original or old and used up O-ring. Go ahead and remove it. Set that aside. Don't get the old one confused with the new one. I will now pick this up and remove the bolts, and I'm going to clean the surface of this entire inner portion of the cap. Spent a couple minutes and polished it up. As you can see, there's still quite a lot on there, and this is pretty old, so what's on there is basically there forever. And in regards to the mating surface of the upper unit, be very cautious if you are going to clean the surface of that, because as you do that, the last thing you want is shavings going down into the gear housing. That would not be good. What I'll do next is grab that 2,4-C grease and apply it to the new O-ring and properly seat that on this part. Again, the 2,4-C Quicksilver grease. Pop the cap off. Just get a little bit on my finger, as you can see here. Close that up, shift that to a side, and go ahead and lubricate the O-ring. Get it all greased up. And this will also help this O-ring properly seat when you secure it to the upper unit. Just like that. I'll clean my hands before I show you. Here's a better view of it. And as you can see, not too much grease, but enough grease to help the O-ring properly seat when you secure this to the upper unit. I'm also going to use anti-seize on the 4 bolts that secure the cap to the upper unit. All 4 bolts are properly anti-seized, and you are going to need a torque wrench. And in our case, with our serial number, Alpha 1 Gen 1, it is going to be 12 pounds torque on those bolts that secure the cap or case to the upper unit. And that is to properly set the bearing inside the carrier of the upper case and alleviate you from over tightening it, because in the event that you over tighten it, you could mess up your entire project that you've worked so hard to get to this point. Again, 12 pounds. I will pick this up and carefully align it properly and rest it in place. And we will now insert all the bolts and hand tighten them only. As you shift this cap in place, you may need to give it some gently taps to properly push it down flush with the lower portion here, but don't overdo it. Again, if it's not going on and down flush with this portion, don't force it. From here, grab your bolts. Again, they have been properly anti-seized. Make sure you do not cross thread them, and hand tighten. I'll do this one, and then I'll come over here, secure that one. Again, they should screw in very easily. If they're not, back the bolt out by turning it counterclockwise, reset the thread, and align it and screw it in. Before the torque wrench, I'm just going to tighten it with a regular ratchet. This is again a 3/8 size, and once I get that tension, I will stop and transition to the torque gun or wrench. I've got my torque wrench set to 12, and I'm going to screw these in sequence until they're at 12 pounds. As you heard there, that clicked, that clicked, that clicked, and that clicked. And I'm not sure if this will be helpful, but I want to show you a closer view of the actual torque wrench as it hit that 12 pounds. See that? That's what you're looking for. Here's the finished product. Again, flush, as you can see. And from here, give it a couple revolutions just to ensure nothing is bound up and it is rotating efficiently and as designed. And that is good. And DIYers, hopefully you're still with us. It is now time to pressure test the upper unit, and that will be the next video scrolling above right now. Definitely join us there as we complete the final step of this upper unit, which again is a pressure test. From here, do us a favor, below the video, you will see that thumbs up icon. Click on that, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Definitely ring your YouTube bell. That would be very helpful to us. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching. Workbench is getting a lot of use. Real quick, DIYers, before I forget, I've got 3 machine cut grooves on the actual shaft, and this third one just above the spline came later on down the line. That is a new design for the new greasable couplers inside your engine, and my original shaft did not have this cut. And what we'll do is down below in the comment section as well as the description section, we are going to post a link that we dive deep into the explanation or comparison or difference between the new design and the original design shaft that does not have that machine cut groove. Definitely check that out. However, coming up here, in our case, you can see just 2 O-rings, but again, that is the original OEM. And coming to our kit here, you've got a large one, you've got 2 smaller ones that are the exact same size, and then you have a largest one This one right here, which is the second largest, will go right there. The two that are smaller than this one and the same size, those are your 2 O-rings that go right inside these cutouts. And this large O-ring will come later on in the project, and that will actually go right over here when we insert and install this gasket to the upper unit. O-rings are now installed, and I found the friendliest way to do this is install that large O-ring first. And once that is installed, there's no longer that large or deep gap or cutout, and you can take the 2 smaller O-rings, slide it up the spline and shaft, and it will conveniently hop right over that large O-ring and continue rolling them all the way up to the top cutouts.